He had the looks, the range, and the raw discipline to become one of the greatest actors of his generation. For a while, he was exactly that, and then, almost overnight, the biggest directors in Hollywood quietly stopped calling. The roles dried up, the offers vanished. Everyone had a theory about why. Almost none of them had the full story. Here it is. He was born Val Edward Kilmer on December 31, 1959, in Los Angeles, California. He grew up in Chatsworth, out in the San Fernando Valley, on a property that had once belonged to Roy Rogers. His father was a real estate developer. His parents divorced when Val was young. From the outside, it looked like a sunny California childhood. It wasn't. When Val was 17, his younger brother Wesley drowned in the family's jacuzzi after suffering an epileptic seizure. Wesley was 15. He was also a budding filmmaker, the brother Val was closest to, the one who shared his obsession with making things. That loss never left him. Decades later, Val would still talk about Wesley as the great unfinished presence in his life, the artist who never got to grow up. Grief, for Val Kilmer, arrived early, and it arrived permanently. That same year, he applied to the drama division at Juilliard in New York. He got in. At 17, he was one of the youngest students ever admitted to the program. Think about what that means. A teenager from the Valley, fresh off the worst loss of his life, walking into the most prestigious acting school in America and holding his own against people years older than him. Whatever else you want to say about Val Kilmer, the talent was never in question. It was there from the very beginning. His film career started, strangely, in comedy. In 1984, he made his debut in Top Secret, a slapstick spoof from the team behind Airplane. He played a rock and roll spy and did his own singing. The next year came Real Genius, where he played a brilliant, wisecracking college prodigy. He was funny, charming, effortless on camera. Hollywood noticed. Then came 1986, Top Gun. Kilmer didn't even want the part. He had no interest in playing a fighter pilot in what he assumed was a recruitment ad with a soundtrack. The studio pushed. He took the role of Tom "Iceman" Kazansky almost reluctantly, the cold, arrogant rival to Tom Cruise's Maverick. The film became one of the biggest movies of the decade, and Iceman, with that jaw-clenching stare and that single snap of the teeth, became iconic. Kilmer was now a name. In 1988, he starred in Willow, the Ron Howard fantasy epic. On that set, he met the British actress Joanne Whalley. They married soon after and would have 2 children, Mercedes and Jack. For a few years, the picture looked complete: rising star, young family, a career climbing steadily toward the top tier. And then Val Kilmer did the thing that defined him as an artist, and, arguably, as a problem. In 1991, Oliver Stone cast him as Jim Morrison in The Doors. Kilmer didn't just play Morrison, he disappeared into him. He learned around 50 Doors songs and sang them himself in the film, and surviving members of the band reportedly couldn't tell his voice from Morrison's on the recordings. He stayed in character. He wore Morrison's clothes off-set. He sent Stone poetry, signed as Morrison. It was total immersion, the kind of commitment that produces something extraordinary on screen and exhausts everyone standing next to the camera. That tension, genius on one side, exhaustion on the other, is the whole story of Val Kilmer. Hold on to it. 2 years later came what many consider his finest performance. In 1993's Tombstone, Kilmer played Doc Holliday, the tubercular, whiskey-soaked gunslinger with the silken southern drawl. "I'm your huckleberry." He was magnetic, dangerous, heartbreaking. Critics who'd written him off as a pretty face went quiet. For a moment, in the early 90s, Val Kilmer looked like he might become one of the defining actors of his generation. In 1995, he put on the cape. Batman Forever made Kilmer, briefly, the biggest star on the planet. The film grossed over $336 million worldwide. He was Batman. You could not get more famous than that. But behind the scenes, something curdled. Director Joel Schumacher would later describe Kilmer as difficult and combative on set, claiming he was rude to crew members and at one point refused to speak to him for 2 weeks. Kilmer, for his part, said the suit was miserable, the experience hollow, and that the whole production was about the Batmobile and the merchandise, not the acting. He declined to return for the sequel. Whatever the truth, and it was probably somewhere in between. A narrative was forming in Hollywood. Val Kilmer was talented, yes, but Val Kilmer was trouble. That same year he appeared in Michael Mann's Heat, holding his own in scenes with De Niro and Pacino. The talent was never the issue. The talent was right there, but the reputation was now traveling faster than the work. Then came 1996, and the film that sealed it. The Island of Dr. Moreau was a catastrophe from the start, a chaotic production with a revolving door of directors and Marlon Brando behaving unpredictably on set. But it was Kilmer who took the public blame. Veteran director John Frankenheimer, brought in to rescue the film, said afterward, in words that followed Kilmer for the rest of his career, that there were two things he would never do: climb Mount Everest and work with Val Kilmer again. That quote did more damage than any flop ever could. It crystallized everything Hollywood had been whispering: directors talk, producers talk, and the word on Val Kilmer was now official: gifted, but not worth the headache. The fall wasn't a crash, it was a slow leak. The leading man offers grew rarer. He still worked constantly. The Saint in 1997, The Salton Sea, Spartan, Oliver Stone's Alexander in 2004, a genuinely brilliant comic turn in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang in 2005 opposite Robert Downey Jr. But the films got smaller, the budgets shrank. By the 2010s, he was turning up in low-budget and direct-to-video projects far beneath the actor who'd once been Doc Holliday and Jim Morrison. And here is where the title of this story earns its name. Because the obvious answer, Hollywood stopped calling because he was difficult, is true. But it isn't the whole truth. The people who actually worked with Kilmer often told a different story. They described someone who wasn't cruel but consumed, an actor so committed to getting the work right that he had no patience for anything that got in the way. He asked too many questions. He pushed back on directors. He treated a film set like a place where the only thing that mattered was the truth of the performance. In an industry that runs on schedules and egos and money, that kind of single-minded devotion reads as arrogance. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was just the same intensity that made The Doors and Tombstone unforgettable. Both things were true at the same time. He was hard to work with. He was also one of the most committed actors of his era. Hollywood decided which of those two facts to remember, and it chose the one that was easier to say out loud. And then there was the part no one saw coming. Around 2014 and 2015, Kilmer began suffering from what turned out to be throat cancer. A devout Christian Scientist, he was initially reluctant to seek conventional treatment, and for a time he publicly denied he was sick at all. Eventually, he underwent a tracheotomy, chemotherapy, and radiation. The treatment saved his life. It also took his voice, the rich, smoky instrument that had been one of his greatest tools as an actor. Afterward, he spoke in a rasping whisper through a device pressed to his throat. So when people ask why Hollywood stopped calling, this is the second half of the answer, and it's the one nobody wants to say. By the time the offers had already thinned from the difficult reputation, his body took the choice away entirely. The man who had sung as Jim Morrison could barely speak. But like the figures in every story like this one, Val Kilmer didn't disappear quietly. In 2021, a documentary called Val was released, built almost entirely from decades of home footage Kilmer himself had shot over his lifetime. Because he could no longer speak clearly, the film was narrated by his son, Jack, reading his father's words in a voice that sounded uncannily like the young Val. It was raw, funny, devastating, and honest about everything: the talent, the ego, the grief, the illness. Audiences who'd reduced him to a punchline saw the actual man for the first time. Then, in 2022, came the moment that closed the circle. Top Gun: Maverick brought him back as Iceman, now an admiral dying of cancer, in a single quiet scene opposite Tom Cruise. Because Kilmer couldn't speak, the filmmakers used AI technology to recreate his voice from old recordings. The scene, two old rivals, one of them fading, wasn't really acting anymore. It was Val Kilmer, on screen, saying goodbye. Val Kilmer died on April 1st, 2025, of pneumonia in Los Angeles. He was 65 years old. So here's the question this whole story comes down to. Did Hollywood stop calling because Val Kilmer was impossible? Or did Hollywood quietly punish a man for caring about the work more than the business, and then, when illness finished what the reputation started, simply look away? The truth, like the title promised, is complicated. He was difficult, he was also brilliant. He was his own worst enemy, and the best thing on screen in half the movies he made. He lost his brother at 17 and spent the rest of his life chasing something through his work that maybe none of the rest of us could see. And in the end, the thing that defined him, that total, reckless, all-consuming commitment, was both the reason he was great and the reason the phone stopped ringing. The performances are still there. Doc Holliday is still pouring whiskey. Iceman is still staring across the room. Jim Morrison is still singing in a voice that wasn't even his. The man is gone. The work refuses to leave. If this story surprised you, you're not alone. Most people only ever knew the rumors, never the man behind them. If you want more stories like this one every week, hit subscribe. And if you've got a favorite Val Kilmer performance, drop it in the comments. We read every one.